Folks, if you wanted to come to our Effective Manager Conference for quite a while, but either we don't come to your location or you simply can't afford it because your company won't pay, we understand, and that's why we've created our Video Effective Manager Conference series of videos. You will be able to see the entire conference on video, including the practice, broken down into small 10 to 15 minute segments. Each segment has a quiz, and there's a transcript to go with it, through which you can search for those topics you wish to go back on. Come to the website, check it out, get a license for our Video Effective Manager Conference.
Welcome to Manager Tools. First Meeting New Direct Series, Tell the Truth, Part 1. Here we go. So we recommend spending time with each new member of our team, encouraging them to tell the truth. Now, you're going to have to tell me about that, because I go into a meeting somebody and I assume they're telling me the truth. And it'd be wise not to do that, right? And tell them not to be afraid of not knowing how to do something or the standard way of doing something in their new role. And there's reasons why we want them to know that.
Yeah. So look, when a direct starts working for you, we obviously recommend you sit down and talk with them over a period of weeks and talk to them about the basic things, the non-negotiable things. We're setting a culture. We're introducing them to the new culture, because we don't know the majority of the time the details of how they work with their previous boss and so on. So you want to accelerate their learning as much as possible right away. And too many managers assume that their directs know everything already. You hired the person, even if it's an internal hire, internal move, you knew what they did before, and so you assume, well, they'll just do the same. Well, what they were doing before, they might have been doing for a year or two. They already understood all the ins and outs. They knew all the relationships, all the people, all the politics, and so on. And because too many managers assume that, you end up with some frustration because the direct doesn't know what to do because of all kinds of normal things.
Or the manager realizes they don't have all this information, but they're going to figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. I'll tell you something else too. The figure it out is like, well, it's better if they learn it the hard way. No, it's not. It's really not. Let's not do that. Okay. So it's far better to give some early, clear guidance to help a new direct understand how to fit in and how to make a difference. And look, many directs are worried about being perceived as not knowledgeable because they were knowledgeable before, but there's all kinds of things in our workplace that you don't interview for, but affect people's ability to get things done. And the direct is worried about not being thought of as knowledgeable, but when in fact, in the beginning, they're not knowledgeable about a lot of things. It's better to tell them to admit their lack of knowledge. And this is simply a subset of you have to tell the truth. So here's our broad outline. We're going to recommend early on in your relationship with your directs that you tell your directs specifically to tell the truth. This is one of those things that goes without saying, and sometimes the things that go without saying need to be said. Okay? Use some examples in your communication with them. Encourage them to say, I don't know, early on, because they can early on. Nobody ought to expect them to know who's the person on the team that does X when it's not an official job responsibility. And then also the final thing is you've got to tell your team to actively offer help as well.
Okay. So let's talk about the first one. Tell your directs to tell the truth. I think that's interesting because most professional organizations assume that all internal communications are truthful. Unfortunately, they're not sometimes.
And I've got to say this at the start, mea culpa, guys. This is probably one of the hardest casts for me to write because I was constantly assuming that Mike was looking over my shoulder. For those of you who don't know it, Mike and I are West Point classmates. We lived with the honor code and still do. And a cadet will not lie, cheat, or steal, nor tolerate those who do. And my classmates and I elected Mike to be the deputy cadet in charge of the honor system, and Mike was responsible for education, and he totally revamped honor system education while we were there at West Point. So this cast is about the honor system, and Mike's already done this before, so I should have had him write the cast, and I should have taken the time off flying back from Europe on the plane. And what I will say is, you're right, there's an assumption. And yet, if you tell people, isn't there an assumption that people tell the truth? Yes. And then you ask the next question, which is, do you know of situations where people shade the truth? Yes. Do you know of situations where people leave stuff out? Yes. Happens all the time. Do you know where situations where people sort of tell one thing to one person and another thing to someone else? Yes. Do you know situations where people delay or simply don't bring stuff up because they're afraid they're going to get in trouble? Yes. Do you know that are there times where people use passive voice? Oh, something bad happened, rather than I messed up, which would be active voice, in order to avoid taking responsibility? Yes. Well, okay. So we assume that things are honest and truthful, but in fact, we have ample evidence that they're not. And we recommend at Manager Tools that you run, that you lead, that you manage an ethical and truthful team. One of my favorite titles of a book ever is, I think Stephen Covey's son wrote this book. It's called The Speed of Trust. If I trust you and I know you're not going to mislead me, it saves me all kinds of time. And trust comes from relationships, as we've said thousands and thousands of times in all of our trainings and conferences and so on. So we assume that communications are truthful, but they're often not. And when it comes to new hires, there are all kinds of reasons for a new hire to be less than candid. Look, maybe they come from an organization where vagueness or cleverness or dissembling were acceptable because the boss set that example. Or look, the simple one, they want to avoid being thought uninformed, which uninformed in today's world is almost by definition ineffective. So we recommend you tell each new direct that honesty and integrity and telling the truth, even when it's not flattering, is a non-negotiable part of being your team member. We don't want you to assume that they'll assume it. We want you to say it, be clear about it, and this elevates the standard of the behavior of those people, you and the people on your team.
Maybe we should get some politicians to listen to this cast. That'd be nice.
Yeah. Yeah, think about what you hear, guys, when you listen to politicians being interviewed. You probably get frustrated that they often come nowhere near directly answering the thrust of the question. Now, compare that frustration you feel and the clear avoiding of responsibility or directness or integrity, if you will, with the assumptions you make about information you receive at work in the form of charts and graphs and spreadsheets and reports, those things you consume, those things you're briefed on, and so on. You assume that what you read or hear at work is truthful. But in a cynical world, you're unlikely to be completely right in your assumption, right? And what happens is if the directs start to believe that the culture of the firm allows that, and you as the manager are the primary setter of the culture of the firm's culture is assumed from who you are and how you behave, you're leading them down a road of manipulation and misdirection if you aren't clear about what you expect and how you behave. So the smart manager, the effective manager, talks openly about ethics. You don't talk about it all the time, but you talk about it in the beginning because beginnings are delicate times. You talk about truthfulness and honesty. So, Mike, one of the things you said to me earlier was that you liked this cast because it talked about ethics in a behavable way, in an actionable way. And so it occurred to me that the best way to do this is to give people a speech. What words would you say to people in order to lay the groundwork? So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you guys some suggestions about what you can say. I know full well that most of you will not use this guidance verbatim, and it's not intended that way, but it's intended to give you some ideas about what to say and how to say it.
On the other hand, there's no reason you couldn't use it verbatim, right? I mean, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time because you want to be yourself, right?
Right. Oh, yeah. If it were me, I absolutely would. I would have some notes. I would have some notes, some bullet points, and I would just use it as close to verbatim as I could because again, you're right. The time it takes me to create my own, I could be spending doing other things. So here's how it might sound, guys. This first conversation, you say, Look, one of my non-negotiable standards is to act and speak with integrity. I don't tolerate lying. I don't tolerate intentional misleading in any way. I believe you are trustworthy by definition because I brought you on board. And I am going to act with complete faith in you until you give me enough information to prove me wrong. If that happens, though, if you prove me wrong, if you lose my trust, it's unlikely you'll be able to stay. We tell the truth on my team, even when it hurts, even when it makes us look bad. I don't mind mistakes. They happen all the time, to me and to everybody else. Failures, let's call a big mistake a failure, aren't great, but you can survive, right? I have failures in my past and I'm still here. But you can't survive telling lies, misleading, or being untruthful here, period. Truthfulness and honesty are simply part of being a professional. We assume them of each other. Doing so helps us do our work faster, and speed matters. We don't have to check. We don't have to double check. If you send me a report, I assume the report is truthful, that you have not intentionally left something out or given me data that shows me what you want me to know rather than something that shows me more fully what would be helpful to me. Trust gives us speed in our work, and that translates into the marketplace. Let me give you a couple of easy examples. First, reporting. Because you're honest, I'm going to trust every report you send to me. That means I'm going to feel completely comfortable forwarding it to my boss and his boss too, without questioning it or checking it. If you send me a report, you're vouching for everything in it, just as if you were speaking to me. Now look, bosses who are honest, or those who don't instill honesty and trust in their team, they have to check their directs works. That takes time, which is the opposite of the speed of trust. I'm not going to do that to you. It'd be an insult to you, to an honest person. But you can probably tell that a system like this creates risk, and not just to you. If you do try to cheat or mislead or shade, you endanger me and the team. Because when I forward things unchecked, your work becomes mine. Your work is always mine, but now I'm communicating it to other people. You do the right thing, the honest thing, and neither one of us has anything to fear. Another example, verbal communications. If you tell me something, I'm going to believe it. I'm generally going to take it at face value. I might disagree with it, but I will believe that what you're saying is true. I won't assume you're telling me what you think I want to hear. I won't have to go ask somebody else what actually happened. What actually happened. That's good because, again, that takes time, right? And it also creates mistrust. If you told me the truth, me going to validate what you told me with someone else creates doubt in your mind whether or not I actually trust you or not. Bosses do this all the time, thinking that the person they're checking on isn't going to find out about it. But in my experience, the direct almost always does. And that doubt leads to fear, and fear, of course, is a little mind killer. So, bottom line, be honest. Be honest even if it makes you look bad. I'm going to say it again. Even if it makes you look bad. Okay? Now look, politics exist around here. But too many people think politics are an excuse to lie, and it is not. If I trust you, I can deal with mistakes, and I can deal with failures too. If I don't trust you, I can't deal with you, regardless of the success you bring to me and to the team and to yourself.
Yeah, that's good, dude.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, the world has become a much less clear, much softer, less hard-edged, less black and white place in the last 50 years. I tell people the story of what it means to follow the honor code, and they're people like, well, that's sort of old-fashioned. It's like, no, I got to tell you, in a lot of places I go, there's an assumption that is lived every day about truthfulness and accuracy. And if a boss asks you, hey, what happened? And you say, I'm waiting on something, but you know, somebody didn't give you something, but you don't say, I didn't reach out to them often enough, or you give the answer that makes you look the best, rather than the answer that you would have wanted to hear if you were the boss, that implies that someone else is responsible when in fact you also had responsibility. People understand that. People know that that is you attempting to put your best foot forward.
Those aren't the words they use, though. They use words like weasel.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about it is people think that it's politics. Well, politics between you and your boss, between you and your subordinates, really narrows enormously. Relationships between two people and the truthfulness associated with that is really not a political calculation. Politics implies relationships and so on, and changing relationships and changing weights of relationships and so on. But politics has become a word that means you can mislead. And if you want to play that game, that's fine, except that you will damage all of your relationships. And people will then call you a politician.
Yeah. Do you worry at all about somebody sharing what you basically gave everybody here in terms of kind of a script? Do you worry about insulting your direct when giving them this speech, so to speak?
You know, it's a great point. I hadn't thought about it. I think the answer is some people could. You know, the truthful person would be like, well, this is a given. And what I would say is, if I got any of that, I'd say, please, I'm not giving this to you. I'm giving this to a new person whom you happen to be. Okay. This is standard stuff. Okay. Sometimes the things that go without saying need to be said. And so we're starting over, right? It's like there's a joke. The Green Bay Packers, who were the dominant football team in the middle 1960s in the U.S., were coached by a famous football coach, Vince Lombardi, famous high D football coach who learned how to coach, at least in part, at West Point, by the way. And every time the Packers lost a football game, which is to say rarely, he would come up to them on Monday or Tuesday morning and he'd say, gentlemen, we lost yesterday, so it's time to go back to the fundamentals, the basics. And he'd hold up a football and he says, this, gentleman, is a football. Right? And he'd literally be like, okay, we're starting over. So I think telling people, here are some things that are important to keep in mind. Things about customers, things about relationships, things about truthfulness, things about speed. You know, your inference that I'm insulting you is not my, I'm not trying to do that. Your inference is not I'm blanking on the word right now. I'm not trying to insinuate anything. I do this with everybody. I don't mean to insult you at all. And of course, as John Wayne once said, if you think I've insulted you, if you're uncertain whether or not I've insulted you, but you think I might have, you're mistaken. Because if I've insulted you, you'll know it. So, no.
When I was reading through it, I thought about it. I worried that a little about the idea that somebody could feel insulted. And then I started thinking, me personally, I might be initially a little taken back. And then I'd start thinking, wow, if I know this is part of kind of a new direct, kind of a new employee kind of briefing, then I'd start thinking like, well, geez, everybody's getting this. And then I start thinking about, well, what does that mean for the team and the environment I'm in? And then all of a sudden I'm thinking, wow, this is cool. I like being part of a team that has these kind of standards.
That goes to the issue of hiring. We have a podcast that came out 10 years ago called Raise the Bar. And one of the most important things we say at our Effective Interviewer Conference is set the bar much higher than you're used to, because you want good people, only good people joining your team. And the bar you're raising, the wall you're erecting, the moat you're erecting or digging around your team also sends a message to everybody on the team, which is, it's hard to get hired here. You're going to be good. We're not going to have any schmoes join the team. By the same token, this person is learning, this new person, even if they feel a little bit insulted. If everybody else learns this team is not going to tolerate somebody coming in and being clever and political and slippery and destroying the trust that the team has worked so hard to build.
That's right. I think people miss that a lot, is that folks on your team won't enforce the standards unless they believe they are enforced. You know what I mean? Unless they believe that the standard actually is real, they won't enforce it. And giving this to everybody, make sure everybody understands the standards, increases the chance that the team will self-enforce the standards.
Yeah. I also think that this is like many other pieces of guidance from manager tools. It's very counter to the modern way of doing things. It is the way great organizations do things. It is the way that things used to be done in high performing organizations, but all things decay, all systems, all processes, all relationships, all margins always decay. That is the nature of the universe, folks. And if you tell your fellow managers, I'm going to do this with all my people, some of your other managers will say, your peers will say, you don't need to, either, well, I don't want to do it because nobody else does it. Well, that's dumb. Like, how do you become great unless you're willing to do things other people aren't doing? Or I don't want to do it because it'll never work. Like, well, if you never try it, how do you know whether? So there are some people who are listening right now who are saying, yeah, I probably won't do that. I'm just going to assume it, or it's too hard. Or maybe there are some of you thinking right now that if I do this, then I actually have to call somebody on misleading me. And the answer is yes. Although there will be plenty of gray areas where you probably allow people to slip and slide. If I have a question about what I'm hearing, I start asking yes or no questions. Yes or no, did this happen or not? Or yes or no, did you do X, or did you do Y, or did you do Z? Because I can't tell you the number of times I say, hey, did we call this person? And the answer I get is, well, what, did we call them or not?
That's a question to be answered with yes or no.
Yeah, and we have led people to believe in the modern workplace that the question of did we call this person can be answered by something other than yes or no. And people are so afraid that a no is going to be perceived as I didn't do what I was supposed to do and now I'm going to get in trouble for operational inefficiency, that they want us to know what actually happened that makes their no okay. This is very similar to the question we ask when we teach interviewing. We ask managers to say, for new hires, we say, or for fresh college graduate hires, we say, what's your GPA? And there's only one correct answer, at least in the U.S. system, and that's a number. And it's a number between 1 and 4.
Not anymore, but it's different.
Right. Well, yeah. And now people say, well, and they want to tell you why their GPA was low before they answer the question. They're essentially saying, I don't want to tell you what you want to know until I get to tell you what I want you to know. The problem with that is it essentially says, I'm not comfortable with what I'm about to tell you, and so I'm willing to subvert the conversational imperative of you ask me a question, and I'm going to take over and attempt to not mislead, but shade what it was, what number I'm going to actually give you. I actually had a kid once who said, well, I don't think GPA is all that important. And I kind of chuckled. I thought, well, that's a gutsy move. And so I said, well, I do. And he said, well, because I don't think it's important, I'm not going to tell you. I said, well, that makes this easy because you're not going to tell me. I'm not going to hire you. And there was just this long silence. But anyway, my point with that is it's fairly common for people to think about the perception that will be left based on their answer, and that there are ways that can't be checked on that you can give a vague answer that can't be proven, and so therefore can't be shown to be a lie, a black and white lie, an intent to mislead, and so therefore they get away with it because they don't want to be thought like they made a mistake.
I just had dinner a couple weeks ago with at my friend John's house, and he had one of the professors at the Army War College was there. I got to meet him. Great guy, very bright, obviously. And we were talking about a number of things, but one of the things that the War College recently did a study about ethics and honesty and reporting in the military. And not good.
It's not good.
The reason being, I'll go into details here, but there are some systemic issues that were causing officers, and just it shocks me and saddens me that people would do this, but there were so many requirements levied on officers at the lowest levels that in terms of training that they had to go, all sorts of different training, and there are just not enough hours to do it. Literally, there are not enough hours to do all the quote unquote required training. So what officers started to do is start to prioritize, and they lie about the things that they didn't get done. They didn't feel they had a choice. So it doesn't excuse the behavior of the officers, but it's useful to see what systems we're putting in place that cause people to do something they know is wrong. And I think there's things as managers, if we just get out of the military, managers we can do to give people, to help people, to set them up for success around honesty and ethics. And one of those is telling people, look, if somebody asks you a question and you don't know, tell them, I don't know the answer to that question, versus feeling like, well, if you don't know, it's a failure because you don't know the answer. No, it's okay not to know, particularly in the beginning.
Yeah, and the fear of not knowing puts people in the situation of thinking they can get away with misleading and saying something that defers or deflects responsibility away from them.
Thanks, everyone. That's it. We'll finish this series up next week. In the meantime, have a great one. So long.
This podcast was produced by Manager Tools. Manager Tools creates actionable management guidance every single week. To receive additional materials via our newsletter and to find products for situations you may face as a manager or a professional, go to www.manager-tools.com. Search for Manager Tools on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn.